Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers. Day after the Seahawks basically got wiped off the map in the running game against the Steelers at home, dropping a key matchup that kept us in playoff contention. We're still technically in the playoff race, but now our playoff life depends on other teams coming to the rescue, which is the worst possible case scenario out of this weekend. And Seahawks need to take care of business next week to even have a shot. But really, the issues and problems with this team point to much larger issues that that tell you that once we were to get into the playoffs, if that is even possible, going anywhere after we're there, it seems remote. So let's talk about a bunch of stuff, Keith. Get this out of our system, shall we? Happy New Year to you. Welcome in.
Yeah. Happy New Year. New Year. Hopefully new Seahawks, because this last year has not been a good year for them.
Yeah. Yeah. They went through a ton of changes in the offseason, Keith. I mean, they spent money. We were excited. They had a great draft again. There's promising changes. The refocus was a priority all the way from the last press conference of the season. After the last game, Pete Carroll comes out and says, we need to stop the run. That's going to be the point of emphasis this offseason. We're gonna do better. Get to the quarterback, stop the run. So they do all those things. We go into the preseason. Everyone's excited. Both of us are thinking, okay, this team went one game into the playoffs last year. We could go further this year. Record's going to improve a little bit. We go out, and the first game we completely laid an egg. This game felt like the first Rams game to me, where we just didn't show up. Like we weren't ready to play. Here's the deal. This is what's concerning to me the most out of this game. A, we couldn't stop the run to save our lives. But B, we weren't ready to play. And this is a situation where it's a home game. Playoffs are on the line. Everyone knows that. You got to show up. And as soon as Pittsburgh showed that they were going to be out physically play us, just physical football, we laid down and let them do it. It was disappointing, and I think it points to larger issues, both in terms of scheme and coaching, that we could have a conversation about, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's where we need to have our conversation today, because, you go through and you look at this game, and the Steelers had 202 yards rushing. Mason Rudolph completed 75% of his passes at 11.4 yards per pass. This is their third string quarterback. This defense is broken. There is just nothing redeeming about it right now. And you're right. They spent money. They spent draft capital. They went and tried to fix the run defense. And what did they get out of it? They got worse. Is that possible? And they showed a graphic in the middle of the game. The first 5, or so maybe it was for 6 weeks, they were the best run defense in the NFL. And since then, they've been the worst run defense in the NFL. How does that happen?
Uchenna Nwasu went out that week, I think.
Yes, a pass rusher. A pass rusher went out that week.
Well, he's really decent setting the edge too, but nonetheless, it's way bigger than just one player.
Yeah.
You're right. I don't know. I think players wore down. I think that it's evident to me. It has always been about this. I know we talked a lot about Jalen Carter in the draft and having a stout defensive tackle in the middle that kind of anchors the entire defense. We don't have that. That's the one thing that I think that a 3-4 defense needs.
Leonard Williams is that.
He's that, but Keith, he's not a stout run defender. He's not 346 pounds. Fair. He's a 300 maybe 5-pound guy that is more of a penetrating defensive tackle, more of a 3-tech, really. He's kind of like Jerron Reed. I love those players, but yesterday I think we saw the weakness. Now, Leonard Williams comes to play. To me, since we acquired him, he's the best defensive player on our team. Save maybe Boye Mafe, but maybe give Boye Mafe another couple of years, and then you can say that. But right now, Leonard Williams is the guy. He shows up every week. He has some pressures. He makes some tackles, but he's just one guy. Yesterday, I just saw a guy like Jerron Reed, who normally is pretty good against the run and can affect some pressure, move the pocket around a little bit. I just felt like he was worn down. Like he just came into the game, didn't have a lot of energy. And you can say that about a number of different players yesterday. But I watched Jerron Reed get pushed around a little bit. I watched him get shoved out of plays where a guard would just move him and open up a hole for Najee Harris. And it happened over and over again in the middle. And he was just the guy I kind of keyed in on, I guess. But as I said, you could say that about a number of different players. Literally nobody at the line of scrimmage was doing anything to slow Pittsburgh down. They weren't holding their position at the line of scrimmage. There wasn't any penetration. There wasn't any physicality. And so when you go look at the tackle totals on this from yesterday's game, almost all of them are at the linebacker level and safety and defensive back. Those guys had outrageous tackle totals, but they were all 4 or 5 yards down from the line of scrimmage. So
yeah, Devin Bush had 17 tackles.
Yeah, he was flying all over the place, 14, but again, 13. He was pushed out of the way and shoved out of the way and missed tackles as well. I mean, you could say that about almost everyone on that defense. The tackling yesterday was horrendous. I mean, we all saw that. They could run at will. They could have run for 300 yards, I think. If they did much better in the second half. I'll give them credit. They came out, they made some adjustments. They weren't going to allow them to run, but that's when Mason Rudolph took off. Had a great passing game. They were able to have some success over the top on a couple of plays. An outstanding catch by Pickens one time. It was just crazy where he beat Michael Jackson over the top a little bit. So, they did what they needed to do. They came in as an 8-7 team, clinging to playoff hopes in the AFC, which is a little more difficult than the NFC. And they came to play. Their fans came out at Lumen Field, which was just, I hate that. I don't like Pittsburgh to begin with. And it was horrible to see that. I thought that the team was not coached well into this game. I think in game calls by Pete Carroll, not going for it on fourth down was a timid response to a team that was totally willing to go for it on fourth down, virtually in the same area of the field in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh was 2 of 3 on fourth down conversions. We didn't even attempt a fourth down try. And so I was disappointed in that from Pete. I thought this is the time of the year where you need to be aggressive. I think you have to show confidence in your team and the ability to pick up a yard. And our offense was going to be carrying this team yesterday. The defense obviously wasn't going to show up, and to just hand the ball back to Pittsburgh, who then went down to score on that next drive, is just it's tough. It's tough. I know that has been a great formula for Pete over the years. But in these sorts of situations, at the end of the season's on the line, you gotta show that you're ready to take chances, and statistically, I think it warrants a chance there where you go for it. So anyway, lot to talk about. I don't like to hype on all of the bad stuff, but Harris had 118 yards after contact yesterday, second most in a game in his career. Awful. It was just awful. It was just awful. And Pete said, I'm surprised here's Pete. I'm surprised we didn't play better. We did the things we needed to in the game plan, and we called everything we had, and we didn't stop them consistently. Both their running backs did a really nice job against us, and it was just more than we could handle, quote unquote. Yeah, it was more than they could handle for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean,
you and I talked right before we recorded about Clint Hurt and this scheme and lack of adjustments.
Problem. I think it's a scheme problem. I do.
Like their version of a 3-4, or is it a 3-4 in general doesn't work anymore against these new offenses or against teams that are heavy run teams? Like, tell me why.
Well, okay, so the 3-4 has never been good against the run. That's kind of been its weakness, like dating back to the 80s, right? But teams have figured out a way to make it work and be better at it. And Seattle has not been able to do those things. But to me, what it comes down to is it's personnel versus scheme. And you have a front office that has shown an ability to draft for a 4-3 defense.
I agree, Keith.
And they know how to evaluate talent for that. And now you're asking them to do it for a 3-4 and it's not working. And you're wondering why. Well, Jarron Reed is not a 3-4 nose tackle.
No,
he's not. And he's a good player, but he's not a nose tackle in a 3-4. You need you were saying this before we hit record. You need a 340-pound guy in there that is impossible to move.
A 3-4 defense is literally the center of that defense is anchored by a guy who can take on double teams, who can 2-gap.
Yep.
That's what a 3-4 is.
We
don't have a single guy on our roster that can do that.
No, and he's a guy that can penetrate. He can get he can play one gap really well. And we've seen him do great things, but he just isn't a 3-4 nose tackle. And they went out and got him to be the nose tackle in this defense because he was good at stopping the run when he was here before. But when he was here before, they had different assignments on what they wanted a nose tackle to do.
There was 2 of him, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, in a 4-3, there's 2 Jarron Reeds, essentially. A guy that's a little bit more stout than that, but yeah.
But you look at this, Jarron Reed can play nose tackle in a 4-3 because he's got one gap responsibility.
But you pair him with like a Clint McDonald, for example, and that worked. And then you have a big defensive end on one side, and then you've got your 5 tech on the other. I mean, yeah. I agree with you on that, the scheme thing, and then the matching of that scheme with the personnel.
Imagine this personnel set up in a 4-3, right? Leonard Williams is your 3 tech, and with Reed as your nose. You've got your 5 tech as Dre Jones, right? And then your 7 tech, your Leo, your rusher,
that side, your designated pass rusher.
Yeah. That is the position which they drafted Darrell Taylor for.
Yeah.
That is the position that he's built to play, not outside linebacker in a 3-4. He's not an outside linebacker. He's a defensive end, but he's too small to be a defensive end in a 3-4. So they're moving him to outside linebacker and making him play.
God, he was pushed around bad yesterday. He was manhandled. I don't even know if he could play in a 4-3, honestly, Keith. To me, I wouldn't have him back, but not even in a 4-3 scheme.
Well, see, the thing is, he can't. Like you put him with his hand on the ground with outside leverage. I mean, Chris Clemens is the example of this, right?
So what do you do with Boye Mafe?
Came from a 3-4 and was thought of as a guy that's never going to be good in Philly. He was too small, not stout enough, whatever. They brought him into Seattle. They stuck him out with wider leverage. And suddenly he could do all sorts of things because it was more about playing angles in terms of run stuffing, right? He wasn't a guy that was going to make a lot of plays in the run, but he made everyone else good by playing angles and forcing the play into Bobby Wagner and company. And that's the type of thing that you could do with Darrell Taylor. Now, you could also put Boye Mafe there and he'd be fine, right? I would say with the current personnel, you put Boye Mafe at basically the KJ Wright spot, the will linebacker, and let him do things there. And then on third down, you bring him up and pass rush him.
How about Uchenna Nwasu?
Nwasu would be your Bruce Irvin in that old defense, right? He would be your strong side linebacker slash pass rusher. So he would do a lot of setting the edge against the run and a lot of getting after the quarterback in on passing downs. He could also be a guy that you'd try at the Leo spot and see what happened.
Well, so here's my only thing about what we've just talked about is you would still have the same guys. They would just be shifting around slightly. You'd have one more guy.
Their responsibilities are different. The thing is, their responsibilities are different. It's not just, oh, you put a guy out there. It's about what are you asking that person to do? And you take your three big guys that are currently your defensive linemen, and right now you're asking them to on a lot of run plays, you're asking them to two gap. They have to hold their own. They've got to stack an offensive lineman, and then shed the tackle or shed the block, make the tackle in the hole. When you switch to a 4-3, now you're asking them to just get in a gap, manage that gap, penetrate if you can, get upfield and be disruptive. And you've got guys that can do that, but the same guys are getting pushed around when you're asking them to two gap, because you're not asking them to get penetration. You're asking them to stack an offensive lineman and basically hold your ground and wait. It's just it's a completely different set of responsibilities. So I think you could have a competent defense with a different scheme. I think this shift to the 3-4, the bear front and that kind of stuff that they've gone to has been counterproductive. Again, it's Pete Carroll trying to evolve away from what wasn't working in the past. But I think they've shifted into something which is also not working. I mean, you look at, Sean Desai was the guy they brought in to help make this transition happen, right? So you had Clint Hurt, which they elevated. He came from the Vic Fangio tree. They brought in Sean Desai, who also came from that tree, to be basically his lieutenant. And then he moved on to Philly this year. Well, he's already been demoted.
Yes.
And Clint Hurt needs to be. I mean, and it's not personal. It's a matter of these guys are trying to run a style of defense that isn't working.
Yes.
It didn't work in Philly. It's not working in Seattle, right? There's problems. And I think you've got to fix the scheme. And before, Seattle's old scheme doesn't work and blah, blah, blah. You can evolve from that without completely changing. Look at what Dan Quinn's doing.
So
right?
Pete Carroll had a couple of quotes here I want to read that he basically throws this thing at the line of scrimmage. Pete Carroll says, the tackling wasn't good enough and we weren't efficient enough. We had shots at the line of scrimmage. He later added, they won the battles better than we did. Carroll was specifically asked about the defense's mindset when it comes to tackling. That's part of it. We felt like we were jacked and ready to go, and we felt like we really hammered principles and the scheme so we could play it really efficient at the line of scrimmage, but it didn't work for us. Mindset is a good question because it needs to be different than it was, or look at what just happened. We gave them too much. So he said line of scrimmage twice. He's hyper aware that they are getting hammered at the line of scrimmage, and for me, if we were going to stay in this scheme, which is fine with a new coach, I think Clint heard we're done. Okay. I think that if we stayed in a 3-4, you got to have that anchor. There's no other 3-4 I've seen in the NFL work without a guy that's just a beast in the middle that takes on double teams, because the whole scheme is set around a guy like that. If you don't have that guy, you're asking other guys to compensate for that, and that's where they get out of skew on their responsibilities. And you end up having guys overplay because they're trying to make a play because other guys aren't able to do as much. And you got to have that anchor. You just do. It's like the centerpiece of a 3-4. You got to have it, and they don't. Okay. So it's going to be an interesting off season. I mean, there's a lot of complexities to this thing because, whether you like it or not, Pete could end up going. You could end up having a new GM, which who knows, right? You never know what direction the owner's going to go when the team doesn't live up to its possibilities, its potential. And I think clearly they've fallen off of that. They did not reach their potential. I think this, when you look at the talent level on the team, it says this is a 10-12 win team potentially. With a couple of bounces here and there, maybe one more player, a difference maker, maybe Uchenna Nwasu doesn't get hurt. Things are a little different. And they've fallen way short of that, right? They're a 500 team. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They could win one more game. They're essentially a 500 team. They're going to limp. They're literally, if they make the playoffs, they will back into the playoffs because they need help from another team. That's the definition of backing into the playoffs. They need the Green Bay Packers to lose against the Chicago Bears, which is a horrible matchup. And the only way that they would lose that game is by dumb luck, turnovers or something. So, and Seattle needs to now go beat one of the best running teams in the NFL in the Arizona Cardinals. Arizona hasn't won very many games, but they just beat the Philadelphia Eagles on the road in a great game. They just played their hearts out and won that game. So
Arizona's they've been better with Kyler Murray back.
Yeah.
I mean, they're
and everyone's healthy
team
right now for them. Yeah.
They're not asking him to do a lot because they're a running team, but he's capable. And so teams have to respect it more than they did before. And
Connor's having a great season. So what happened? Where do we go from here, man? I mean, I'm just as disappointed as anybody. The people out there, the fans, our listeners are very disappointed. They're listening now to a lot of people talking about scheme change, about coaching changes, about players not living up to their contracts, about jettisoning from fixtures on this team and basically rebooting this thing. How do you see it? What do you think is realistic? Let's get real here. Let's not.
I don't think Pete Carroll's going anywhere unless he has decided that this isn't working, and he decides that he is part of the problem.
If he's in the way,
he's not getting fired. Like, people can want to believe whatever they want to believe, but it's not going to happen.
And how do you feel about that?
I'm actually okay with that. I think the problem lies not. I think the problem currently lies in the guys that are under him.
He gave some autonomy to the defensive coaches and our offensive coaches, correct?
Yeah.
Now, the buck stops with Pete, right?
It does, but it's not it comes down to me where, he made some decisions. They haven't worked. Not every decision you make is going to work. You can't, nobody bats 1,000, right? The key is that you identify when things aren't working and you move on. and you make changes, and you don't try and force it. Like for him to continue to go, okay, we're gonna come back again. We're gonna take this coaching staff and we're going to just run it back out there and try and make some personnel changes. Well, what isn't working, right? It's not working because your personnel isn't matching. So there's a disconnect there. You've got somewhere between your game planning and the players on the field, there's a disconnect because guys aren't doing what's being coached regularly,
or they're incapable of it.
Yeah. And to me, there's the disconnect. So you're like, okay, you know what? This isn't working. Let's make a change. Let's figure out what we need to do. And I think that is the direction. To say that, oh yeah, the buck stops with Pete, and therefore Pete's responsible for every failure. Okay, sure, but everyone has errors. Everyone has mistakes. The key is, can you identify them and move on?
Well, he's shown that he can. He's rebooted this roster twice, including coaching.
And I think that they're to a point where they need to look at that on the defensive side of the ball, and reboot this.
And just for the record, too, I'm 100% with you on this. I don't think Pete's going anywhere. I don't necessarily want him to go anywhere right now at this moment, because I don't necessarily believe that he's the inherent problem. There are others out there that will argue that he's lost the team. He's lost the coaching staff. He's lost the team. They're not doing what he wants to do. He's already had 2 opportunities to reboot, and they've turned out to be unsuccessful. And I would argue that it's extraordinarily difficult to reboot and be successful. And he's done a great job. If you take a look at our record and so forth, well, then you might listen to arguments that say, well, we haven't made it past, the first game in the playoffs for 7 seasons or whatever. There are arguments to be made. I mean, it's not a perfect scenario, but I think he still gives us the best opportunity to win in the next 3 years, because it's extraordinarily difficult to bring in a new coaching staff and expect good things to happen right away. Usually when you do that, you're talking about a complete turnover of your roster, because the coaching staff and the scheme demands that you're going to have your own players and so forth. Who knows what's going on with John Schneider at that point, et cetera, or the ownership could be, team could be for sale in the next couple seasons. We've heard about that.
It won't be.
And so you just kind of
keep saying that, but the timetable for the sale,
I heard it was 2025.
Years. Is what?
Oh, okay. I heard it was 2025 that they were going to try to do something.
No, it was 20 years from when Paul Allen died. That's the timetable. It takes it. That's what they're looking at, and they're going to stretch this out because she loves the team and is a fan. Now the Blazers, if that one is sold, that's going to be this one that's done sooner. But the Seahawks,
she could still be part of an ownership group that could potentially buy the Seahawks that wasn't under Vulcan.
Yeah,
they could create another situation. So let's get back to this season. Let's focus on finishing this thing out. And I'm probably just as excited as you to get to the off season and talk about prospects and get to the draft and how do we fix this thing and all that stuff. But it's not going to happen for another couple of weeks. So let's talk about what we have, what we need to do to kind of finish this thing out. And I have a question for you. So a guy like, contract situation like Leonard Williams, if your team's far away, or if you're going to switch back to a 4-3, do you retain a guy like Leonard Williams?
If you
and
can,
how much does that cost?
You retain him. He's your best defensive lineman, and he can play in a 4-3. He'd be better in a 4-3.
He can play in a 4-3, absolutely.
He'd be better in a 4-3.
And you let Jaron Reed go. If he doesn't cost too much, you keep Jaron Reed. I mean, he's under contract next year, I believe. But
yeah, if you can swing it to have both of them, you do. If you can't, your first choice is to have Leonard Williams and let Jaron Reed go and replace Jaron Reed with a different nose, and go from there. But
they really like Jaron Reed too, by the way, as far as being
I do too. I think he's a good guy, a good player, who's been cast in a role that isn't what he's suited for. You look at what happened. He started as a nose tackle in Seattle's old scheme. And for a couple of years, he did that. And then Brandon Mebane took over the job at nose, and they moved Jaron Reed to 3-tech, which is kind of where he belonged. And he exploded for 10 sacks and then got paid.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that was his career arc. And it worked really well. And Leonard Williams he's an upgraded version of Jaron Reed. So I'd take that, especially if you're going to, if you're looking for a 3-tech and a 4-3, you keep Leonard Williams, you let Jaron Reed go, or you keep Jaron Reed around for a year as you make a transition back to a 4-3, and you give yourself, a gap to get the right personnel. And he's under contract for another year anyway, so you let it happen. You re-sign Leonard Williams to be your 3. You leave Jaron Reed in there as your nose for a year unless you find the right guy.
So let me ask you this. Got one game remaining. It seems unlikely that we're going to get into the playoffs just because I just don't see Green Bay losing.
You need Dallas too. You need not Dallas. You need Chicago to come out and win and get you in there. And Chicago's bad.
And Chicago has the first pick in the NFL draft for a reason. Does this next game matter?
Well, Chicago has the first pick in the NFL draft because they made a trade.
Yeah, that's true. I know, but
smart trade, by the way.
Turns out.
But does this game what? What's your question?
Does this game even matter? Next game?
I mean, you go out, you win it, you make it so
you play to win, of course.
You keep yourself above 500. You give yourself a shot. I mean, it matters a little bit, but in the long scheme, no, because Chicago's not going to win, and if they do, the Seahawks are one and done in the playoffs anyway, so it doesn't matter. So in the end, I don't think this game matters much at all. I want to see, the team show some fight, and I want to be entertained, and I'm a Seahawks fan, and I want to see them win and all of that.
I'm going to the game, so yeah, I want those things too.
Ultimately, what it comes down to is what happens after that.
We've reached that point, haven't we?
So I've kind of got an ideal situation that I wanted to throw at you and get your opinion on this. After the season, Pete Carroll says, "I'm moving to the front office," because he's also president of the team, and he takes a step off the field. He's still around, he's still doing stuff, but he does that, and they hired Dan Quinn as the head coach, and let Dan Quinn hire his own coaching staff. What do you think of that?
Yeah, Pete Carroll's a defensive-minded coach. We all know that. One of the best that's ever been. Dan Quinn would be another defensive-minded coach on a team that right now I think needs a defensive-minded coach. Now, is Dan Quinn both the head coach and kind of the DC? In some respects, yes. Now, does he have another DC that actually calls the plays? Yeah, but they work together. So that would be cool. And then he could maybe even hire Shane Waldron. Who knows? I don't know what his offensive philosophy is as a head coach, but he did have, when he was a head coach, he had Shanahan for a while, correct? Mm-hmm. When he was in Atlanta.
Yep.
And
When
so he's
he,
familiar with that, as far as pairing with that sort of a scheme. So that would be interesting to me. Is it enough of a change? Yeah, it's a huge change. That's a huge change. That would be moving on from an era. So
it would
anytime
be.
you do that, anything can happen. Your culture shifts. The whole thing kind of shifts. Now, Pete, I don't think that that's going to happen. But if it did, I think I would be okay with it, because what else are you going to do? Like, are you going to go to the college ranks to get a guy, or are you going to recycle somebody from the NFL? Well, chances are it's probably going to be a recycle situation, or it could be a younger coach potentially. I like the
This
idea of Dan Quinn because he commands respect. He's done well beyond the Seahawks.
he did
He's
well
established
in
himself.
Atlanta. They got him to a
Yeah.
Super Bowl. Um,
Yeah.
and then the roster just deteriorated. He didn't
Yeah.
have any say in personnel, and the roster just fell apart underneath him. And he's done great since leaving Atlanta as a DC. Like, his defense in Dallas is a monster.
Yeah. Yeah.
And clearly his scheme ideas work really well in the NFL. So,
and would work well with Seattle's personnel.
Yeah. And I like the idea of having Pete in the building and still part of the team, because what
would
Pete
his
did,
role be on a daily with the team, or would he essentially vanish?
I don't think he would vanish. As team president, he would be around. He would be overseeing non-football things, to try and put stuff in place to help the football operations. And he would be there as an advisor and, mentor for Dan Quinn, and a guy that will do anything you need him to.
You sound almost excited when you're talking about this potential.
I see this as a way for the Seahawks to make a transition into something that, at least defensively, we know works. And I don't want to move on.
If it's going to happen, it's going to happen this year, because I think Dan Quinn gets a head coaching offer.
Oh, he absolutely will. He would take it. And I know that he would probably take the Seahawks job in that scenario. But I don't think Pete's ready to move on yet. I don't think so either. But at the same time, there's been a level of frustration in his voice at every press conference this year.
For obvious reasons, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's for obvious reasons. I could see him just being like, you know what, maybe it's time. And this is a soft transition for him to, go ahead and do that.
I just think that Pete loves to be connected to the players on the field, in practice, motivating. He's still really good at all that stuff. Somewhere along the line, this whole thing kind of got away from him, I think, a little bit, as far as giving the autonomy to a guy like Clint Hurt, who really didn't have an HC job or a DC job prior to this, kind of under Pete's, coaching staff for 2-3 years prior. And then he's had a couple of years now where he's just shown the inability to make this thing work. And and not only that, but really bad, like bottom 25 defense. And it's worse this year than it was last year, even though the personnel, quote unquote, has improved. And you got to move on. You can't not move on. Like, Clint Hurt's done. It's over. As a, you said it's not personal. It is certainly not personal. Clint Hurt, by any stretch, is a good guy, meaning well, etc. But meaning well in the NFL is nothing. You got to have results, and the results have not been there at all. And so you've got to move on. And the question is, do you stick with the 3-4, or do you move to a 4-3, and who do you get? And I don't know who would be out there and who's available.
No, but as far as defensive coordinators, that's not a thing where I'm tapped into. But it comes down to what philosophy do you want? What do you want to bring in? Why was Pete so determined to get Vic Fangio's defense in here?
I think because he saw it working against the Rams and working against the 49ers as something that could slow those offenses down a little bit.
Okay.
That was the original thought.
But
is he was trying to slow down his own division.
Sure.
More than anything else.
It didn't work, right?
It didn't work.
Those
and San Francisco has actually moved on from that in a sense that they're more of a run-oriented team, and they've got a really good game manager quarterback that can actually move the ball around a little bit. So it worked out tremendously well for them. But, the Rams are still kind of the Rams. I think you can eventually slow those down. Maybe. But nobody's really slowing both those teams down consistently. I give Pete credit, though. I will say this. You'd mentioned the idea of imagination and moving on and taking chances and being forward thinking. And Pete's done those things. Now, you said, nobody bats 1,000. Well, that's true, and it didn't happen. But he did move on when there was a real big call for him to do something drastically different, and he tried.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we talked about him rebooting the coaching staff a couple of times. So the first one happened. He lost Gus Bradley to a head coaching job. He lost Dan Quinn to a coaching job.
And he went internal.
Yeah, he went internal on all these and stuck with Chris Richard, right? Who got the job over Ken Norton. And that kind of divided the locker room a little bit because
and Ken moved on to the
the linebackers wanted Ken Norton, the defensive backs wanted Chris Richard. Chris Richard got it because of his ability to do great things for just a bunch of defensive backs on top of the big three of
and he was ready to lead more so.
Yeah,
he was just he was a better coach.
And so he stepped in and did that. Norton got pissed and left and went to I was going to say Vegas, but went to Oakland, went to the Raiders and did the job there. And that's when things started to, because of the disconnect between different groups wanting different guys to be promoted. It worked for a bit. It kind of didn't work for a bit. And discipline became an issue. And so Pete made the decision to go back to Ken Norton because Ken Norton was the team's disciplinarian. And so he rebooted the defensive coaching staff a little bit, bringing Norton back and kind of getting back to their roots. But Ken Norton has shown that he's a great linebacker coach. He's a great motivator. He's a great coaching enforcer. But he's not a defensive coordinator. He's just not that guy.
And Clint Hurt has shown the exact same thing.
Yeah. And so when they went to that, it didn't work. And he let him try and work it out for a couple of years. And when it didn't work, and he moved on. And they went to Clint Hurt because a lot of the same reasons. He's a good
He earned
teacher.
The opportunity by being a good position coach on it,
And he came from the scheme that Pete wanted. He wanted Vic Fangio's version of a 3-4. He wanted that.
So what you're saying is he took a chance in name only, but really he knew exactly what he was getting, and it wasn't really a coordinator.
Well,
it was a guy that could be his.
You didn't know
guy.
if he could be a coordinator because he hadn't been a coordinator.
Yeah.
Right. So he'd been with the team for a couple of years. They knew him. They knew that he had been in on planning meetings, but he also had, experience coaching the scheme that they wanted to move to. And so they did that. They went at, and some guys just aren't, they don't have the skill set to game plan, to really come up with, okay, how are we going to attack this team when they do certain things, and what make adjustments. So if it's not working, here's what we're going to do, and all the different things that go into game planning. It's really complex, and it's a big thing. It's not just people think it's calling the plays. It's what plays you call on Sundays. It's not. That is 10 or 15% of the job.
Yeah, it's not just managing the game and managing the players. It's being out there. Like it's knowing how to anticipate. It's literally knowing every potential thing that somebody wants to throw at you, as opposed to understanding what you are and what your guys are and putting them in a position. You're trying to counter. There's no counter in Seattle. There's
yeah. And that's the problem. And so I think that you okay, he's not that. I think you have to bring in an experienced, successful defensive coordinator at this point. You have to go see if you can pry Vic Fangio. If you're going to want to run the scheme, bring in the guy who knows the scheme, who runs the scheme, who coaches the scheme, and has done it
in Miami or Tampa, right?
Yeah,
somewhere in there.
I think that he's their DC, but go get a guy like that and bring him in. Don't run another position coach up there hoping that he's going to figure it out.
So if Dan Quinn came and also had the assistant head coach title, is that enough to pry him?
No.
From Dallas?
No. I mean, it might be enough to pry him from Dallas, but why? He's not taking that job. He's getting a head coaching job. He's going to go be the head coach in San Diego, not San Diego, the Chargers, LA, or someplace like that, which he knows, because that's where he went when he left Atlanta. He went to be their defensive coordinator, and that was the last competent defense that they've had in Chargerland, was when he was there. And after he moved on, their defense has just been trash, and the reason why they're not winning games. So they know him, and I would be very surprised if he doesn't get an offer. If you can't have him be an assistant head coach and whatever.
I'd like to see maybe the defense. I can't remember his name, but the defensive coordinator for Cleveland this year and last year did an outstanding job.
Yeah,
like to see something like that. Yeah,
there are guys that have done a good job.
Sure. Yeah. And we'll look into it. We'll look into it for sure. This will be a major topic of discussion, I have to imagine.
Well, yeah, because my guess is that when the season ends a week from now, we're going to have a few days of speculating, and then stuff's going to start to happen. And that's going to be just the way it is. Interesting. Think about, Chicago's got the first overall pick in the draft, right? And they've also got a young quarterback that they've not done right by. But they're in a position to go get Caleb Williams.
Yeah, that kid's going to be traded, or they're going to get out of that pick. Yeah, one of the two.
I don't. Why? When you've got 1 year left of Justin Fields, and you haven't seen enough from him, man, an idea of giving Seattle's offense a guy with the athleticism and ability of Justin Fields. That's an idea. Putting him in a position where he's actually got talent around him, seeing what happens. That would be, as far as talent, it's an upgrade.
Seattle's just got a lot of decision making to do this offseason for sure. And I don't want to jump the gun, so we'll save that conversation, because that conversation is probably going to come sooner than we want. It is. So, Happy New Year. 2023 was awesome. Football and all. We had a great off season. We're going to be at it again this year. If you're a new listener, we pretty much stick with it not 24/7, but 7 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year. We don't take any time off. So we're immediately transitioning to prospects and so forth in the draft. So it's fun to stick around in the off season. Yeah, and lots of big changes, I think, for this team, no matter what happens, no matter what the next 1 to 2, 3 weeks should bring. There's going to be a lot of changes on this coaching staff at a minimum, I would think, and then personnel, obviously. So let's wrap this thing up. Let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. We're on all your favorite, excuse me, podcast platforms and YouTube. And we look forward to having you join us. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.